Hello there, this is a video showing an absolutely outstanding A-grade photography A-level personal investigation that was completed at my centre. Really fantastic piece of work based around the dance industry and the theme of fluidity and figurative movement. In the video I'll go through the different workbooks, of which there were 2 altogether, an image portfolio, a work portfolio, 4 essential sheets and the essay title that this student then created. All of which you can see on this image here, all constitute towards this student's final A-level grade. The first part of the work will be containing 4, or in this case 5 essential sheets, all of which go towards showing the examiner the key parts of the assessment objectives. It's really crucial that you try and make something which summarises the assessment objectives in different ways, as the examiner will have a short amount of time where they need to mark your work and really get to grips with what your theme is about. This is a guide that I give to students to help them when writing the rationale sheet, which rationalises their investigation, explains and summarises the key parts of their work, which really helps with AO1 and AO4. Here is the student sheet, which is the rationale sheet here, and this then details images at the top and then a summary of what the student did overall following the different bits of exploration in their investigation. This next sheet is a content sheet, or in this case you'll see a circular contents as well as then a standard content sheet which is in a square format, which is just showing without information everything that the students selected as their best images. This sheet is the outcome sheet, which clearly indicates which outcomes the student has selected and how they finalise the work, all of which was also explained in the student's essay as well and the workbook. All of these sheets are completed on Photoshop, but they're often wrote out in Word first, just so you've got a word processor there and so you can just check it without the pressure of then seeing it next to your images. It is crucial that you talk over your final piece selection with other students to see what they think, and also your classroom teacher, just so you are always picking the best ideas, but your best selection is really needed for this sheet. And then this is the contact with the examiner that shows them that this is what you've selected and why. The final essential sheet here is the artist connection sheet, which, informed from the book and also from the essay, shows each artist image on the left hand side, the student's responses in the middle and the further to the right, with a very brief summary on the right hand side. This is then to be used in combination with deeper analysis, which can be seen in your essay and your workbook. The next part of the video will show different flick-throughs of each one of the pages that made up this student's 2 workbooks. It clearly says in the top left there, it focused originally and initially on the dance industry, but it also then looked as time went on to move beyond dance and movement and fluidity to embrace other concepts about the dance industry, including both positive and very negative aspects of particularly ballet and choreographed dance. It's essential that you start your work off with lots of inspiration, looking on Pinterest, Behance, Instagram, to try and find influences that could help you to explore your theme. This student presents mood boards in the middle of the page and then annotation around the outside to show the examiner they have understood why they've picked these images and how they could influence their investigation. The student is then more selective with the images and artists that she's chosen to investigate further, and then creates more in-depth research looking into key considerations, analysing the images, finding out what they could do at post-process and also the pre-planning of those shots, and then clearly details the connection of the work as well, all of which is wrote up in rough first and then typed out later on, all of which will help you in preparation for your essay. On this page here you can see that the student has crossed out one of the artists. She found that as the investigation continued they weren't as relevant and she chose not to take that further. It's very crucial though that you don't get rid of research that you've done or potential ideas, as it shows how your work has developed and shows your decision making throughout the unit. This next page is actually very important for the examiner to see that you're thinking about the planning and preparing behind the sets you're going to take. Don't just go straight into taking the sets. Always get to make sure that you draw out ideas and present annotations and diagrams for how you intend to make your sets come to life. It doesn't matter how basic your drawings are, it's all about the communication of the idea, which is essential for AO1 and AO3 in the work that you make. So definitely make drawings no matter what level of drawing skill you may have. Here are the first set images that were taken. This was then using a model and doing some very sort of simplistic dance poses, but the student had already experimented with light, making sure that they got a dark background and a focal light source to present a set of really well taken shots. She had experimented with the prime lens and the zoom lens, which she then details in the annotation and the book as she goes on. The student then presents the best image she's taken, also then connects and explains the work that she's done and shows some developments with layering alongside the artist to show a full communication of what she's intending to do and show understanding of the theme that she's intending to portray. This is a great example of an evidence page, which is always displayed alongside a showcase page. So it's evidencing your work, showing those assessment objectives, but then also making sure that you show a showcase, which happens a little bit later in the book. She moves straight into then set 2, which is where she's starting to use chalks, which is a similar sort of material that the artist uses, and starts to adopt a little bit more vibrancy, a little bit more action in the poses that she then takes. Again, she connects and explains the images, makes sure she shows different artist connections, and relates it back to the theme she's taking. In set 3, she tries to use coloured lighting and then coloured chalks just to show a little bit of a refined process and a bit of a change in thought and a bit of a change in the way that she explores the sets as she progresses. In the next page here, you can see that she's again attempted to show little bits of layering to refine the work that she's doing, but also show understanding in the annotation that she's making. This page is a showcase page, indicating to the examiner that these are larger images, well printed, fully corrected, and they are the best possible showcase of what she can make with the images that she's got. This next page, entitled Where Am I Now, is a very, very good habit to get yourself into as an A-level student. Don't just sort of preempt and think that the examiner will know where you are and understand how you've evaluated the different parts of your processes. Always stop every 4 or 5 sets, show where you are now, write a little bit about what your thoughts are about how you can progress before moving on to the next set. It doesn't have to be a big thing, it can just be a single page like this student has done, and it can really help the examiner to get to grips with your work in a really clear and visually obvious way. In set 4, and here, which are the corrected 9 images, she goes back to looking at the artist in its stripped back form and just looking at those pure images of just trying to get those still poses, and then presents a showcase for those different shots where she tries to then use the pattern stamp technique, which then uses a little bit more fluidity and action in the actual brush and texture of the images, as well as then doing it in the actual movement itself. These next pages here show different ideas for sets, also the reintroduction of a little bit of research where the artist is looking at then water, fluid movement, and different artists that use installation props and models in different ways, all of which she then draws as little diagrams that could also show potential for how her investigation could progress. To reference the fluidity itself more literally, more directly, the student then photographs water droplets and streams of water, jets of water in the darkroom underneath a strong light source, therefore giving her the potential to then layer into her images later on. She also experiments with inks into a fish tank, and which she then photographs, and also attempts to use coloured inks and different things, which she then uses as layer material with the other shots that she's taken and from previous sets in the work that she's made. This next page shows a fabric test set and then set 5, where she tries to take an idea with using a chair and using a larger prop, and then using fabrics to create more obvious and more direct movement in the different sets that she's taken, all of which again she could layer in and she experiments with on the following pages. As it moves into set 6, this was the set where she then used the chair, covered the chair, and tried to bring in more of an element of performance. The student had interest in drama as well as dance, which they clearly wanted to communicate in their portfolio. It's a very good idea to try and get your main interests. It can be from the subject specifically or your wider interests into the work that you're making. It'll keep you interested, and it could be a really useful tool if you go on to uni or interviews, and that's what you're going into. Again, she looks at a little bit of where to next, and this is where the work takes a little bit of a turn, and not necessarily in the right direction, but this is how it progressed at this particular time. The student then wanted to involve and try out a little bit of a fashion aesthetic where she looked at different photographers and thought she'd try and get that into the work. However, as time progressed, even though they were successful developments and decent sets of images, she then found that after a while the sets themselves didn't really work. So what she did was she then recontextualized ideas, she thought about the work she was doing, and then she contextualized the theme in her double page, which is shown here. She then talks about how the images weren't really effective what she was looking for, and how she chooses to go back to focusing on what was previously successful. This shows AO2 and AO4 because it's a refined process and it's more selective. The students showing that personal awareness of what they need to do. They look back towards using ink and fluid motion in the work that they are making and using that as layer material to then try out ideas. As this first book starts to get towards a close, the student presents a timeline of the different sets that they've made and shows the sets that they've deliberately not taken forward, and then gives reasoning for why in the annotation that's then shown. This is the last page, a little bit of a showcase showing that literal link between the fluidity of the element of water and then one of her selected shots that she used for her showcase. Moving into set 9, which goes into the next book, she starts to look at other elements that could represent the dance industry, whether that could be like the objects such as ballet shoes or leotards, using the clothing and using the actual elements of dance as a means to investigate as well. The student then looks at creating more restricted lighting, taking the ideas forward that were successful previously that she enjoyed, which were creating really crisp, really sharp, but quite reduced lighting scenarios to create a little bit more intrigue and a little bit more mystery for the viewer of her work. She then starts to look at canvas extensions, where she exaggerates the space to try and create that element where her photos look as if they've been taken on a large stage, which is a typical place where performances or dance could take place, just bringing the viewer into the work that she's making. And moved into set 10, where she's then taking pictures of the individual forms and elements such as ballet shoes and different parts associated with the dance industry, which she will then use later on to layer into. In this page here, she uses those objects directly and realizes that some of the shapes that are created by the ballet shoes and the ribbon fit very well into the figure and then into the different parts of the model, therefore creating different outcomes for that student to investigate. In this next page, you can see where the photographer then decides to then introduce a tutu, just to see the effects that that can actually have on the sets that she's taking. And in this case, sometimes it was the intended images that worked well, others it was the unintended images, whether that was a little bit of accidental cropping that she's then capitalised on later on, or in the case of this page here in the top right, you can see where she's attempted to use different pom-poms and doilies and things to throw towards the camera to exaggerate movement, but all of which have created a bit more of an ambiguous form where the figure gets totally wiped out, which was one of the actual ideas that she was looking into showing later on in the work, and became useful in showing the more negative aspects of dance. Alongside the negative aspects, it's also about trying to show and promote the benefits of dance by showing what it can do for you in terms of your fitness, as well as then being able to follow successful choreography or complete a difficult piece of dance. That's the part where my sort of expertise fails a little bit, really. I'll stick to the photography here, as well as showing the images themselves, the evaluation, the understanding. It's key that you also show processes. And some students choose to do that through print screens and taking little shots of what you may do traditionally and highlight them for the examiners so they understand the processes you followed. These next few pages show showcases of the best development images that the student had made, before then moving on to mixing numerous sets together, using the liquid water, using the different fluid movements, the ribbon, and the different layered images that the student had completed in her investigations into single successful images. Before hitting set 12, the student then just reconfirms ideas, does a little bit of extra research into artists that use more conceptual means of representing their ideas, not just directly using more obvious images. These images here, where the figure is wrapped in a fabric, are supposed to represent the constriction of the dance industry, and even though sort of like freeing in some cases, it can be quite constricting in others in terms of the rules that you're supposed to follow. And the student then looked into it more closely, choosing to focus on ideas and stories that she'd researched in the work that she was going to take. In the most cases, she decided to then focus on the negative aspect of ballet dancers' diets, and in the case where, in some cases, she'd read about ballet dancers eating tissue paper many nights before a performance to suppress their appetite and then keep themselves in the condition that they need to. She decided to represent this in a number of ways, both showing the model frustrated in front of a table of food, and then at the same time eating tissue paper for a set of images. Obviously it wasn't really even the tissue paper, it was just showing it for point and purpose of the set. She then developed the idea further, mixing those images together and trying something different than just the dance and the different sort of concept that she'd used before. Moving away from this, she then went into set 15, where she looked at them relationships between dancers in the dance industry and tried to show the frustration and the struggle that some people would feel in that particular situation. She then still does what she would normally do, selects her best 9, annotates her images, makes sure she's explaining what she's doing, and then corrects the images that she's making. To make a further link to drama and then a particular practitioner called Bertolt Brecht, she looks at the ideas that that practitioner had and tries to incorporate it into a set of photographs. She then starts to make her own placards and messages and then uses those with her models in this set of images. With those placards, she then takes them forwards, uses those images for layers, and also then rephotographs sets of ballet shoes, but whilst being worn this time in more restrictive lighting. All of which, including a set of tape, gave her different elements that she could use to layer that were more effective than just straight alone standard fluidic elements such as the water and the chalk. The measuring tape, which she used then to wrap images in that she then reprinted, and then also using the wrapped ballet shoes on, became a more relevant way and a more sophisticated way for her to layer, which was ultimately one of the parts which really confirmed the fact that she had the A grade. The images were then taken back into Photoshop and used to layer into previous sets to link that idea of constriction. Images then progress forward, and then the student takes a little bit of a conceptual jump and prints on a more unconventional surface. They printed their images onto tissue paper and to toilet tissue, which is generally the material that she found out that they eat, and then she experimented with layering the tissue paper in real life, sometimes finding that the traditional experiments were even more intriguing than the more photoshopped experiments, as they often had an unpredictable edge. This was very, very useful for AO2 experimentation marks as well. And one of the best images that she selected to take through from this was actually a rejected image that was printed onto the tissue paper and was transferred onto the paper behind. However, this would have not happened if it wouldn't have been for the student experimenting. So keep an eye on what you're doing. Think about how you can push your ideas outside of the box. Alongside the different experiments she made, she goes back into Photoshop and uses the new ballet shoes shots that she'd taken and layers on the inside, creating a bit more of a monumental, huge scale change between the two different types of images. As the workbook comes to conclusion, the student includes a portfolio which they created that summarises each different part of the stages she then followed. She does do this in the essential sheets as well, but this was a useful tool for getting prepared for university interviews and also for helping her write a rationale and summarise her ideas ready for displaying and showing to the examiner. The images on this next page are all about how the ideas fit with the concept, and in this case, how do those images relate? What do they do? How do they relate to that original question, and also any changes that she'd made throughout the course? This is all then explained in this page. Then, before finally finishing off with that same page, making sure that she rationalises all of the different shots that she's taken. All of which then concludes her workbook before moving into the essential sheets and then her personal portfolio of images. This image on the screen is just showing which images the student has chosen to represent her work the best, both in her essay and then also as a portfolio of images that are just standalone to be then complemented by the information which is inside her general workbooks and other parts of her work. I hope this video has been helpful for you guys, just to give you a really good, firm, solid idea of what a quality A grade looks like. And for the rest of the parts of this video, I'm just going to leave the images just playing along. One of the questions that came up was why wasn't this an A-star unit? Why wasn't it an A-star? What was missing? What could the student have done to get those grades? Now, from going to standardisation meetings and from different talks with the exam board and different sort of legislation, protocol and stuff that you read, it's very clear that the top part of the mark band, which is the exceptional part of the mark band, is supposed to be for the most exceptional work that you can see. It's key to always try and your best to be the most sophisticated you can be and look at the assessment objectives. I've just popped it on the screen here, but all of which you should hopefully have seen by now if you're doing A-levels anyway, but it clearly goes through the wording and whether it's an exceptional response, an excellent response, or a consistent response. And every single part of this student's work was excellent. It just then has to be a justification between whether parts are exceptional enough to then move them into that top band. And the best thing that you can do is talk to your teacher about that. How could you move it further? What could this student have done? Maybe it could be that this student could have totally developed the idea of the tissue paper and then sort of look back at getting the ideas pushed up for the experimentation parts of the mark. It could have been that maybe the student would have looked at other conceptual artists and got that into the work there. There's a number of different things that could be done, but the thing to bear in mind is always look back at your assessment objectives. If you do the best that you possibly can do and you follow even some of the parts that are in this video, it should get you towards a good grade. Make sure you talk to your teachers about this, guys. Make sure that you communicate with them and that you always are pushing for the best possible grade that you can get. Look at good examples, look at different examples, and try and get the little bits that could push your work just that little bit further in your own investigation. Anyway, that's enough talking from me. I'll let a little bit of jingly music do the rest of this for me. Thank you guys. Good luck. Bye.